I never thought I'd be sitting in a Manhattan boardroom watching three people who once made me cry myself to sleep nervously adjust their ties while waiting to be interviewed by my assistant. 10 years ago, Rory Danzig called me the charity case. Steve Jobs in front of our entire business class. Professor Granger nodded approvingly while the room erupted in laughter. Today, Rory's resume sits on Selene's desk, and he doesn't even know I'm watching through the glass wall of my corner office. But here's what nobody tells you about revenge: it tastes like nothing at all. What happens when the people who broke you need something only you can give them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Calypso Wynn, and I used to believe that success would feel like vindication. At 32, I'm the CEO of Medthera, a tech company that just got valued at $47 million. We build our platforms that connect underserved youth with mentors, and somehow, I've convinced the world that a foster kid from Queens knows something about changing lives. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm sitting in a corner office on the 42nd floor of a building I couldn't have afforded to visit a decade ago. The walls are lined with awards I never thought I'd win, and through my window, I can see the coffee shop in Brooklyn, where I used to work 16-hour shifts while coding in my spare time. Selene Park, my assistant, knocks on my door with that familiar mixture of efficiency and warmth that made me hire her 3 years ago. She was 24 then, sleeping on friends' couches and working 3 part-time jobs while finishing her degree. Something about her reminded me of myself, not the version sitting here now, but the one who lived on ramen noodles and determination. The interviews start in 20 minutes, she says, setting a steaming cup of coffee on my desk. It's the good stuff now, imported from some small farm in Colombia. But I still remember the bitter bodega coffee that sustained me through those early years. Who's first? I ask, though I already know the answer. I've been dreading and anticipating this day for weeks. Rory Danzig, she replies, consulting her tablet. Marketing director position. His resume is ... interesting. Interesting is Selene's polite way of saying underwhelming. I've seen Rory's LinkedIn profile a string of failed startups and lateral moves that suggest someone who talks a big game but can't execute. The same person who once told our entire advanced business strategy class that my idea for mentoring software was emotionally manipulative and commercially unviable. I remember that day with crystalline clarity. It was October 2013, and I was 22 years old, convinced that I had figured out something revolutionary. I'd spent months researching the statistics on youth aging out of foster care, the correlation between mentorship and success rates, the gap in technology designed to bridge social inequality. My presentation was passionate, maybe even naive, but it was backed by solid research and a personal understanding that none of my classmates possessed. Professor Granger had called on me to present first, which I later realized was strategic. Nothing sets the tone for intellectual humiliation quite like making the charity case lead off with something the room could collectively dismiss. Miss Wynn, Professor Granger had said, stroking his beard as I finished my presentation, while your intentions are admirable, I fear you've confused a non-profit mission with a business model. This isn't Sunday school. The laughter had started with Rory's theatrical snort, spread through the rows of perfectly pressed khakis and trust fund confidence, and settled like lead in my chest. I'd stood there, watching 24 future business leaders learn that it was acceptable, even encouraged, to mark ideas that prioritized impact over immediate profit. Charity case Steve Jobs thinks she's going to save the world, Rory had whispered, just loud enough for the entire front row to hear. More laughter. I'd gathered my papers with shaking hands and returned to my seat, spending the rest of the class period fighting back tears and promising myself I'd prove them wrong. That promise became my North Star through everything that followed. Dropping out of school when I couldn't afford the next semester's tuition. Working at Grounds Coffee in Park Slope while building my first prototype on a laptop held together with electrical tape. Sleeping on air mattresses in studios I shared with 3 other people. Eating peanut butter sandwiches for weeks at a time. I kept a journal during those years, writing in it every night after work. The entry started as angry manifestos against everyone who dismissed me, but they evolved into something more nuanced reflections on what I was learning, both about business and about myself. I still have that journal, leather-bound and worn thin from being carried in backpacks and messenger bags across 5 different apartments. Should I send him in? Selene asks, pulling me back to the present. I look at her, really look at her. Selene represents everything I was trying to build back when Rory laughed at me. She grew up in a working-class family in Queens, the first in her family to graduate college. When I met her at a community mentorship fair I was volunteering at, she was struggling to find stable housing while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in computer science. She had that same hungry look I recognize from my own mirror, the one that says, "I know I'm capable of more if someone would just give me a chance." Hiring Selene wasn't charity, it was recognition. She's brilliant, hardworking, and possesses an emotional intelligence that most of my Ivy League contemporaries lack entirely. She handles million-dollar negotiations with the same competence. She brings to coordinating my schedule, and she does it all while somehow maintaining the warmth and humility that drew me to her in the first place. Give me 5 more minutes, I tell her. I want to review his application one more time. She nods and closes the door behind her, leaving me alone with Rory's resume and a decade of complicated feelings. His career trajectory reads like a cautionary tale about the difference between confidence and competence. After graduation, he started a social media marketing company that folded within 18 months. Then a brief stint at a tech startup that got acquired for parts. A series of consulting gigs, each lasting shorter than the last. Finally, a 2-year stretch at a mid-sized agency where he was let go due to restructuring, corporate speak. For it didn't work out. Meanwhile, I'd been building Menthara from the ground up. The first 2 years were brutal. I was coding 18 hours a day, teaching myself everything from user interface design to database architecture. I had no investors, no mentors, no network of family friends willing to write checks to help me get started. Every feature I built, every line of code I wrote, every user I acquired was the result of pure determination and an increasingly sophisticated understanding of what underserved communities actually needed. The breakthrough came in year 3. When a nonprofit in the Bronx started using our platform to connect teenage mothers with career mentors. The success stories began trickling in young women who were finding stable employment, pursuing education, building support networks that extended far beyond our app. The local news picked up the story, then a tech blog, then TechCrunch. Suddenly, investors who'd never returned my emails were calling, wanting to discuss partnership opportunities. I was careful about who I took money from. I'd learned enough about venture capital to know that not all investors understand or respect mission-driven companies. I ended up working with a fund that specialized in social impact startups, people who understood that success could be measured in more than just quarterly returns. But even as Menthara grew, expanding to new cities, adding features, hiring employees, I never forgot the feeling of standing in that classroom while people laughed at my ambitions. Success, I discovered, doesn't erase humiliation. It just gives you a different perspective on it. Through my office window, I can see Rory sitting in our waiting area, checking his phone and occasionally glancing around at the modern furniture and motivational posters featuring young people of color pursuing education and careers. The irony is almost perfect. The same person who marked the idea of technology-enabled mentorship for underserved youth is now hoping to make a living from it. I could reject his application outright. It would be easy to justify his experience. Doesn't align with our needs. His track record suggests instability. His values based on past behavior don't match our company culture. All of those things are true, and any reasonable CEO would pass. But there's another part of me. The part that's been shaped by every mentor who saw potential in me when others saw only limitations, that wonders whether this moment could be about something larger than settling old scores. Maybe the real test of whether I've grown beyond the hurt and anger of that classroom is whether I can see Rory as something more than the sum of his worst moments. My phone buzzes with a text from my brother Leo. Saw the Forbes article. Mum would be proud. It's been 6 months since we last spoke, and even longer since we've seen each other in person. Leo aged out of foster care 2 years before I did, and we've maintained a complicated relationship ever since, equal parts love and survival guilt, pride and resentment. I type back, miss her every day, then deleted and put the phone away. Some conversations are too big for text messages. Selene knocks again, and I call for her to enter. Ready? She asks. I stand up, straightening my blazer a far cry from the thrift store cardigans I used to wear, and take a deep breath. Send him in. As I watch Rory walk toward my office through the glass wall, I'm struck by how much smaller he seems than he did in my memory. He's still handsome in that polished, symmetrical way that opens doors and wins first impressions. But there's something diminished about his posture, a slight hesitation in his stride that speaks 2 years of setbacks and compromised expectations. He doesn't see me watching. He doesn't know that the CEO of the company he's hoping to join is the same person he once dismissed as delusional. In about 30 seconds, he's going to walk into this office and come face to face with the most expensive lesson of his life. The question is, what am I going to do with this moment? Rory's face goes through about 5 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds when he walks into my office and realizes who I am. Surprise, confusion, recognition, panic, and finally, that forced smile that people use when they're trying to pretend that running into someone whose dreams they publicly marked is perfectly normal. Calypso, he says. And I can hear him calculating whether to use my first name or try for something more formal. Wow, I had no idea you were ... the CEO. I finish for him, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Please, sit down. He settles into the chair with the careful movements of someone who's suddenly very aware that every gesture is being evaluated. I watch him take in the office the awards on the walls, the framed photo of me shaking hands with the mayor, the view of Manhattan spreading out behind me like a promise kept. This is incredible, he says. And for the first time since he walked in, his voice sounds genuine rather than calculated. I mean, I knew Menthora was doing well, but I had no idea you were the founder. That's amazing. I lean back in my chair, studying his face. The Rory from business school would never have admitted amazement about anything I'd accomplished. That Rory was too busy protecting his own position in the social hierarchy to acknowledge excellence in others. This version seems genuinely impressed, which makes everything more complicated. Thank you, I say, so tell me, what brings you to Menthora? What is it about our mission that interests you? It's a standard interview question, but I'm curious whether he'll make the connection between our current work and the presentation he ridiculed a decade ago. I'm also curious whether he remembers that presentation at all, or if destroying my confidence was such a casual cruelty that it didn't even register as memorable. He straightens up, shifting into interview mode. Well, I've been following the social impact space for a while now, and what you've built here is really impressive. The way you've scaled mentorship through technology, the outcomes you're achieving with at-risk youth, it's exactly the kind of work that makes me excited about the intersection of business and social change. The words sound rehearsed, like something he Googled about our company 30 minutes before walking in here. But there's also something else in his voice, a thread of genuine enthusiasm that surprises me. Maybe losing his way professionally has taught him to value work that matters in ways he couldn't understand when everything came easily. That's interesting, I say. Have you always been passionate about social impact? He pauses, and I can see him wrestling with whether to tell me what he thinks I want to hear or something closer to the truth. Honestly? No, I spent a lot of years chasing the wrong things, building companies that I thought would make me rich, but didn't actually solve problems that mattered. It took some setbacks to help me realize that I wanted to be part of something bigger. There's a humility in his admission that I wasn't expecting. The Rory I remember was incapable of acknowledging mistakes or limitations. This version seems to have been worn down by experience in ways that might have actually improved him. Tell me about those setbacks, I say. He runs a hand through his hair, a gesture I remember from school. Where do I start? My first company failed because I was so focused on user acquisition that I never figured out how to actually make money. The second one failed because I was so focused on making money that I forgot users need to actually want the product. I've been fired twice, both times because I thought I was smarter than everyone else in the room and didn't bother to listen to feedback. He looks directly at me then, and something in his expression shifts. I'm not proud of the person I was in business school, Calypso. I was arrogant and dismissive, and I said things that were unnecessarily cruel. I owe you an apology for that. The words hang in the air between us, and I feel something I wasn't prepared for, relief. Not because I needed his apology to validate my success, but because hearing him acknowledge his behavior means I'm not crazy for remembering it the way I do. Sometimes, when you're the only person who seems to remember being hurt, you start to wonder if you made the whole thing up. Thank you for saying that, I tell him. That day was difficult for me. I can imagine, he says, and his voice is quiet now, stripped of the performative confidence that used to armor every word he spoke. I've thought about it a lot over the years, especially as I started experiencing failure myself. The way we treated you that day was inexcusable. We sit in silence for a moment, and I find myself remembering the journal entry I wrote that night 10 years ago. I'd been so angry, so hurt, so convinced that I would never amount to anything because people like Rory would always have advantages I couldn't access. I'd written about feeling invisible, about wondering if maybe they were right, and I was just delusional about my own capabilities. Reading that entry now, after everything I've accomplished, breaks my heart for my younger self. She was so brilliant, and so broken, so full of ideas, and so convinced that no one would ever take her seriously. If I could go back and tell her that one day Rory Danzig would be sitting in her office asking for a job, she never would have believed me. Can I ask you something? I say, of course. Do you remember what my presentation was about that day? The one Professor Granger assigned. Rory's face goes slightly red, and he looks down at his hands. You were talking about mentorship platforms, using technology to connect kids aging out of foster care with professional mentors. He looks up at me again. You were talking about exactly what Mentora does now, so he does remember. That's something, at least, I spent 3 months researching. That presentation, I tell him. I interviewed kids in foster care, talked to social workers, studied outcome data from existing mentorship programs. I wasn't just throwing around feel-good ideas, I was identifying a real market need that no one was addressing. I know, he says simply, I was just stupid and scared to recognize it at the time, scared. He sighs, a sound that seems to come from somewhere deep and tired. You want to know the truth. Your presentation terrified me because it was better than anything I'd ever come up with. You had passion and research and a real understanding of the problem you were trying to solve. All I had was confidence and connections, and I was starting to realize that might not be enough. This is not the conversation I expected to have when I walked into work this morning. I'd prepared myself for awkwardness, maybe even for the satisfaction of rejecting someone who had once rejected me. I hadn't prepared myself for honesty, for growth, for the possibility that people can genuinely change. So instead of acknowledging that, I say, you decided to tear me down. Instead of acknowledging that, I decided to tear you down, he agrees. It was easier than admitting I felt threatened by someone I'd written off as beneath me. The confession settles between us like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of recognition through memories I'd carried for years. How many times had I wondered what I'd done wrong that day, whether I'd presented poorly or failed to articulate my vision clearly. How many times had I attributed their laughter to my own inadequacy rather than their defensiveness? My phone buzzes with a text from Selene. How's it going? Should I reschedule the 2 p.m.? I glance at the clock and realize we've been talking for 40 minutes. Interview protocol suggests I should wrap this up, make my decision, move on to the next candidate. But something about this conversation feels unfinished, like we've opened a door that can't be easily closed. I need to ask you something else, I say. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, if I offered you this job, would you be working for me? Or would you be working for the company that happens to be led by someone you once dismissed? Because there's a difference, and I need to know which one it would be. He considers the question for a long time, longer than I expected. When he finally speaks, his voice is careful and deliberate. I'd be working for you, he says, because the person who built this company, who turned that presentation everyone laughed it into a $47 million business, who figured out how to scale social impact, that person deserves my respect. And my best work. The fact that I was too blind to see that potential 10 years ago is my loss, not yours. I study his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated charm. But what I see is something I never expected to see from Rory Danzig, genuine humility. I'm not going to make a decision today, I tell him. I have to more candidates to interview, and I need time to think about what kind of team I want to build. Of course, he says, standing up. Thank you for your time, and for ... for giving me a chance to apologize. Regardless of what you decide about the position, I'm grateful for that. He's almost to the door when I call his name, Rory. He turns back. For what it's worth, I think failure might have been good for you. He smiles then, the first entirely natural expression I've seen from him since he walked in. Yeah, he says, I think you might be right. After he leaves, I sit alone in my office, staring out at the city and trying to make sense of what just happened. The conversation I'd been dreading for weeks had turned into something entirely different, not a moment of triumph or revenge, but a reckoning with the complicated ways people can change. I pull out my phone and scroll through my contacts until I find Professor Granger's number. He'd reached out 6 months ago, asking if I'd be willing to speak to his current students about entrepreneurship. I'd ignored the email, then felt guilty about ignoring it, then ignored the guilt. But now, sitting here after my conversation with Rory, I find myself wondering what I would say to a room full of 22-year-olds who might include the next version of me, brilliant, scared, and convinced that their ideas don't matter. I don't call him yet. But I don't delete his number either. Instead, I text Selene, send in the next candidate, and clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. I have some thinking to do. The next candidate is someone I've never met, someone whose resume doesn't carry the weight of old wounds or unexpected redemptions. Someone I can evaluate purely on merit, without the complicated backdrop of shared history. But as I review her application, I find myself thinking about the person I was 10 years ago, sitting in that classroom and absorbing the message that dreams like mine were fundamentally unserious. I think about how close I came to believing them. How many nights I lay awake wondering if maybe they were right, and I was just fooling myself. The truth is, Rory's apology doesn't undo the damage of that day or erase the years I spent proving myself to people who had already decided I didn't matter. But it does something else, something I hadn't anticipated. It confirms that the problem was never with my ideas or my potential. The problem was with people who couldn't see past their own assumptions and insecurities. That's a gift I never expected to receive, and I'm not sure what to do with it yet. The next candidate, Maya Chen, is exactly the kind of person I normally love to hire. 26 years old, graduated from a state school with a marketing degree she paid for herself. 3 years of experience at nonprofits where she learned to do exceptional work with impossible budgets. Her portfolio shows campaigns that are both creative and effective, and her references describe her as someone who brings both strategic thinking and genuine empathy to her work. Under normal circumstances, I'd offer her the job on the spot. But these aren't normal circumstances, and I find myself struggling to focus on her answers because my mind keeps drifting back to my conversation with Rory. The professional part of me knows that hiring decisions should be based on qualifications, cultural fit, and potential for growth. The human part of me is wrestling with questions that have nothing to do with quarterly projections or team dynamics. I'm particularly interested in your work with the Education Access Initiative, I tell Maya, referring to a campaign she led to increase college enrollment among first-generation students. Can you walk me through your strategy there? She lights up, and for the next 15 minutes, she gives me a detailed breakdown of how she identified barriers to college enrollment, developed targeted messaging for different communities, and measured success through both quantitative metrics and qualitative storytelling. It's exactly the kind of sophisticated, impact-driven thinking that Menthara needs. That's impressive, I say when she finishes. What drew you to that particular issue? Personal experience, she says simply. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I almost didn't because the whole process felt so foreign and overwhelming. Even though I had good grades, I felt like it wasn't for people like me. Once I realized how common that feeling was, I knew I wanted to work on breaking down those barriers for other students. There it is, the thing that always draws me to the best candidates. Not just the technical skills or the impressive resume, but the personal understanding that comes from having lived the problems you're trying to solve. Maya gets it in the same way I got it when I was designing Menthara's platform, in the same way Selene gets it when she's training new mentors. We talk for another 20 minutes about her vision for social impact marketing, her ideas for expanding our reach, her thoughts on measuring success in mission-driven organizations. Everything she says reinforces my initial impression. She's talented, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to the work. As I walk her to the elevator, I find myself envying her clarity. She knows what she wants, believes in her ability to achieve it, and hasn't yet been worn down by the kind of professional disappointments that can make people cynical. She reminds me of myself at her age, before the business school humiliation, when I still believed that good ideas and hard work were enough to guarantee success. Thank you for your time, she says as the elevator doors open. I really hope I get the chance to work with you and your team. You'll hear from us soon, I promise, and I mean it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After she leaves, I walk back to my office, but instead of sitting behind my desk, I find myself standing at the window, looking down at the street 42 floors below. From this height, the people look like they're playing out the world's most elaborate board game, moving in patterns that seem random but probably make perfect sense if you could see the bigger picture. Selene knocks and enters without waiting for permission, which is one of the many things I appreciate about our working relationship. She's learned to read my moods well enough to know when I need space and when I need someone to help me think through complicated situations. How did it go with Maya? She asks, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. She's perfect. I say smart, experienced, passionate about the mission. She'd be an incredible addition to the team, but I turn away from the window and look at Selene. But I keep thinking about the conversation I had with Rory this morning, the one where he apologized for being a complete ass to you in business school. I laughed despite myself. Selene has a way of cutting through complexity to get to the heart of things. Yes, that one. And now you're wondering whether you should hire him instead of someone who's clearly more qualified. I don't know what I'm wondering, I admit. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that Rory Danzig would be sitting in my office asking for a job, I would have said it was poetic justice. But now that it's actually happened, it doesn't feel the way you thought it would. It doesn't feel like anything. I say that's what's confusing me. I thought I'd feel vindicated, or satisfied, or at least something. Instead, I just feel tired. Selene is quiet for a moment, the kind of thoughtful silence that means she's choosing her words carefully. Can I tell you something? She finally says, always, when I first started working here, I used to wonder why you hired me. My resume wasn't that impressive. I didn't have connections, and I definitely didn't have the kind of polished interview skills that most successful people seem to expect. You were brilliant and hardworking, and you saw something in me that other people missed. She interrupts gently. You gave me a chance when I needed one most, and it changed the trajectory of my entire life. Not just professionally, but personally. You taught me that I was capable of more than I believed. I sit down across from her, not sure where she's going with this, but trusting that it's somewhere I need to hear. The thing is, she continues, I don't think you hired me because you felt sorry for me or because you wanted to be charitable. I think you hired me because you recognized something in my story that connected to your own experience. You understood what it felt like to be underestimated. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the question isn't whether Rory deserves a second chance. Maybe the question is whether giving him one would be consistent with the values that built this company in the first place. Her words settle into the space between us, and I feel something shifting in my understanding of the situation. Selene is right. Menthora was built on the belief that people's potential isn't always visible on the surface, that talent and drive can come from unexpected places, that sometimes the best employees are the ones who have something to prove. But there's a difference between someone who's been underestimated and someone who's been humbled by their own failures. Maya represents the former talented person who deserves an opportunity to show what she can do. Rory represents the latter, someone who had opportunities and squandered them, who's learned hard lessons about the gap between confidence and competence. What do you think about him? I asked Selene. You interviewed him first. What was your impression, honestly? I was prepared to dislike him based on what you told me about business school, but he seemed different than I expected, more thoughtful, more willing to admit when he didn't know something. Different how? Well, most of the marketing directors I interview spend the whole time trying to convince me how impressive they are. They name-drop clients, exaggerate their role in successful campaigns, make everything sound like it was their idea. Rory did the opposite. He was almost too honest about his failures, too willing to take responsibility for things that went wrong. That tracks with my own impression of him. The Rory I remember from school would never have admitted to being wrong about anything, let alone acknowledge that his own arrogance had contributed to his professional setbacks. Do you think people can really change? I ask her. I think failure can be an incredible teacher if people are willing to learn from it, she says. And I think some people need to lose everything before they can figure out what actually matters. My phone buzzes with a text message, and I glance down to see Leo's name on the screen. Can we talk? There's something I need to tell you. I stare at the message for a long moment. Leo and I have maintained a careful distance for years, checking in with each other just often enough to confirm that we're both still alive and functioning, but never getting close enough to risk reopening old wounds. A text like this, urgent and vague, is completely out of character for him. Everything okay? Selene asks, noticing my expression. I'm not sure, I say, putting the phone back down without responding to Leo's message. Family stuff, she nods, understanding that some conversations are too complicated for office hours. Do you want to call it a day? I can reschedule your 3 o'clock. No, let's power through. But can you do me a favor? Set up a call with Maya Chen for tomorrow morning. I want to make her an offer. And Rory, I hesitate, staring at the stack of resumes on my desk. Maya is the safe choice, the obvious choice, the choice that makes sense from every professional angle. But something about my conversation with Rory has stayed with me. Some sense that there might be more to this decision than simple professional calculus. Let me think about it, I say finally. Give me until tomorrow afternoon. After Selene leaves, I sit alone in my office, trying to sort through the complicated emotions that today has stirred up. Success was supposed to simplify things, to provide clear answers to questions about my own worth and capabilities. Instead, it's created new kinds of uncertainty, new ways to second-guess myself. I pull out the old journal from my desk drawer, the one I carried through all those years of struggle and doubt. The leather cover is worn soft from handling, and some of the pages are stained with coffee rings from late-night writing sessions. I flip to an entry from November 2013, written a few weeks after the disastrous presentation. I keep wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I am just being naive about what business really requires. Maybe caring about impact is a luxury I can't afford if I actually want to succeed. But then I think about all the kids aging out of foster care who could benefit from better mentorship, connections, and I know I can't let their skepticism become my reality. I have to believe that business can be a force for good, even if nobody else in that classroom sees it that way. Reading those words now, I'm struck by how much courage it took for my younger self to keep believing in her vision when everyone around her was suggesting it was fundamentally flawed. She was so alone in that belief, so determined to prove something that felt impossible to prove, but she did prove it. We proved it. Menthora exists, it's successful, and it's helping exactly the people I wanted to help when I first pitched the idea to a room full of skeptics. The question now is, what do I do? With that proof, I could hire Maya, build the team with people who already understand and appreciate the mission. That would be the smart business decision, the choice that minimizes risk and maximizes the likelihood of continued success. Or I could take a chance on someone who represents everything I once stood against, someone who's learned through failure what I learned through determination. That would be the choice that reflects the values I started with, the belief that people can change and grow and become better versions of themselves. I'm still sitting there, staring out at the city and trying to decide what kind of leader I want to be, when my phone rings. Leo's name appears on the screen. And after a moment's hesitation, I answer. Hey, I say Cal, he says, and his voice sounds strained in a way that immediately puts me on alert. I need to see you. Can you meet me somewhere? What's wrong? I'd rather tell you in person. Are you free tonight? I glance at my calendar, mentally rearranging meetings and obligations. I can be. Where do you want to meet? That coffee shop in Park Slope where you used to work. Grounds, 7 o'clock. The choice of location surprises me. Leo has never shown much interest in the places that were significant during my early struggle years. But something in his voice suggests this isn't the time to ask questions. I'll be there, I say. After we hang up, I sit in the growing silence of my office, feeling the weight of too many unresolved conversations and unmade decisions. Outside my window, the sun is starting to set, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and orange that would be beautiful if I weren't so preoccupied with everything that feels uncertain. Tomorrow, I'll make the call about hiring Maya or Rory. Tonight, I'll find out what's troubling Leo enough to break our careful pattern of distant but cordial communication. But right now, I'm just sitting in a corner office I once couldn't have imagined occupying, wondering if success is supposed to feel this complicated, and missing the clarity I had when I was too young and too poor to afford doubt. Grounds Coffee looks exactly the same as it did when I worked there 5 years ago. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture that was probably vintage when I was born, and the persistent smell of espresso and unrealized ambitions. I'm sitting in the corner booth where I used to write code on my breaks, laptop balanced on a table scarred with ring stains and carved initials, trying to figure out why Leo wanted to meet here. He's 15 minutes late, which is typical. Leo has never been good with time, appointments, or really any of the social conventions that make adult life function smoothly. When we were kids in the system, his rebellion took the form of deliberate unreliability, missing curfews, skipping appointments with social workers, disappearing for hours without explanation. It was his way of asserting control in a life where most decisions were made for him. I order a cappuccino from Marcus, the same barista who used to let me work extra shifts when my rent was due. He doesn't recognize me at first. I'm wearing a designer blazer instead of a coffee-stained apron, and my hair is professionally styled rather than pulled back in the kind of practical ponytail that says I'm too tired to care about appearances. Holy shit, he says when he realizes who I am, Calypso. I saw that article about your company in the Times. That's incredible. Thanks, I say, feeling the familiar discomfort that comes with being recognized for success. How are things here? Same. As always, different broke 20-somethings, same dreams of making it big. He grins and leans against the counter. You were always different, though. Even when you were working doubles and living on ramen, you had this. I don't know, this certainty that you were going somewhere. I want to tell him that certainty was mostly an act, that I spent most of those years terrified that I was deluding myself about my own potential. But before I can respond, I see Leo walking through the door, and all my attention shifts to him. My brother looks older than his 36 years, worn down by a life that's been harder than mine in ways that are difficult to quantify. Where I learned to channel my foster care experience into determination, Leo seemed to absorb it as evidence that the world was fundamentally unfair and not worth trusting. He's thin in the way that suggests irregular meals and too much stress. And there's a tightness around his eyes that I don't remember from our last conversation. Sorry, I'm late, he says, sliding into the booth across from me. Traffic was insane. Leo doesn't own a car, which means he took the subway, which means traffic had nothing to do with his tardiness. But I don't call him on it. We've both gotten good at small deceptions over the years, ways of protecting ourselves from having to explain too much about our choices or circumstances. It's fine, I say. I was catching up with Marcus. Leo glances over at the barista, who's moved on to helping other customers, then back at me. Weird being back here. A little, I admit. Good weird, though. Reminds me how far I've come. Yeah, he says, but his voice is flat in a way that suggests he doesn't find my success as uncomplicated as I'm trying to make it sound. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. He pauses, running his hands through hair that needs cutting. And I can see him trying to figure out how to start whatever conversation he came here to have. Leo has never been good at direct communication, especially when it comes to anything that might make him vulnerable. I've been thinking a lot about that Forbes article, he finally says. The one where you talked about growing up in foster care, about how it motivated you to build something that would help other kids in similar situations. I remember that article. The journalist had been particularly interested in my background, framing it as a classic overcoming adversity story. I'd been careful with my words, trying to be honest about the challenges while avoiding the kind of details that would make readers feel sorry for me rather than inspired by what I'd built. What about it? I ask. You made it sound like foster care was this thing that happened to us, this external challenge that we overcame through hard work and determination. He looks directly at me for the first time since sitting down. But that's not the whole story, is it? Something in his tone makes me uncomfortable, though I'm not sure why. What do you mean? I mean that when you were building your company, working those crazy hours and living on no money, I was still struggling just to keep my head above water. And you knew that. We talked on the phone every few months, and I was always telling you about whatever job I'd lost or apartment I'd gotten evicted from or relationship that had fallen apart. He's right. And the memory of those conversations makes me feel guilty, in ways I've been trying not to examine too closely. During the hardest years of building Menthora, when I was working 18-hour days and surviving on willpower and caffeine, Leo was cycling through a series of low-paying jobs and unstable living situations. He'd call me when things got particularly bad, and I'd listen sympathetically, offer what advice I could, sometimes even send money I couldn't afford to spare. But I'd also felt frustrated with him during those conversations, frustrated with his inability to create the kind of stability that seems so essential to moving forward. I'd wanted him to apply the same relentless determination to his own life that I was applying to mine, and I'd never understood why he couldn't seem to make it stick. I tried to help. I say whenever you needed money or a place to stay. I'm not talking about money, he interrupts. I'm talking about the fact that while you were building something that would help other foster kids, your own brother was barely keeping it together, and somehow that never seemed to factor into your mission statement. The accusation hits me like a physical blow, partly because it's unfair and partly because it contains just enough truth to make me question things I thought I'd settled about my own motivations. That's not fair, Leo. I couldn't save you and build a company at the same time. I was barely surviving myself. I know that, he says, and his voice is softer now, less accusatory. I'm not saying you should have dropped everything to fix my life. I'm saying that it's complicated to read about your success helping disadvantaged youth when I know how complicated it's been for you to help the disadvantaged youth in your own family. We sit in silence for a moment, and I find myself thinking about all the decisions I made during those early years of Menthora. Every hour I spent coding was an hour I wasn't available to help Leo with whatever crisis he was facing. Every dollar I invested in the company was a dollar I couldn't send him when his rent was due. Every bit of emotional energy I poured into building something sustainable was energy I wasn't spending on maintaining our relationship. I told myself that building Menthora was the best way I could help people like us, that creating systems and opportunities would have more impact than trying to solve individual problems one at a time. And I still believe that's true. But I'm starting to understand that Leo experienced my choice differently, as a rejection of our specific relationship in favor of abstract ideals. Why are you telling me this now? I ask because I've been thinking about applying to one of your mentorship programs, he says, and his voice is carefully neutral, like he's afraid of how I'll react. The one for adults transitioning to new careers. And I realized I didn't know if I wanted mentorship from my sister's company or if I wanted Mentorship despite my sister's company. The confession surprises me more than anything he's said so far. Leo has always been fiercely independent, suspicious of help that comes with strings attached or emotional complications. The idea that he would consider joining one of our programs, that he would be willing to be vulnerable about his professional struggles with strangers, suggests a level of desperation that breaks my heart. Leo, I say gently, you know, you don't need to go through our formal program if you want career guidance. We can just talk. Can we, though? He looks at me with an expression that's half challenge, half genuine question. When's the last time? We had a conversation about my actual life that didn't end with you giving me advice I didn't ask for or me feeling like a disappointment compared to everything you've accomplished. The truth is, I can't remember. Our conversations have become increasingly surface level over the years, careful exchanges of basic information designed to maintain connection without risking real intimacy. I've attributed that distance to his discomfort with my success. But now I'm wondering if I've been just as responsible for creating it. I'm sorry, I say, and I mean it. I didn't realize you felt like I was judging you. I don't think you mean to, he says. But it's hard to talk to someone about struggling when their response is always some version of have you tried working harder? Or maybe you need to be more strategic about your goals. He's right, and recognizing the truth of it makes me feel like a hypocrite. I've built a company based on the idea that people need understanding and support to reach their potential. But I've been offering my own brother advice and judgment instead of the kind of patient mentorship I provide to strangers. What kind of career transition are you thinking about? I ask, trying to shift the conversation towards something constructive. I've been taking community college classes in graphic design, he says. Turns out I'm actually pretty good at it, but I don't know how to turn that into steady work, and I don't have the kind of network that opens doors. I feel a surge of excitement about his artistic discovery, followed immediately by frustration that I'm just learning about it now. Leo, that's amazing. How long have you been studying design? About a year and a half. I started with online tutorials, then enrolled in actual classes when I could afford them. He pulls out his phone and shows me some of his work logos and posters and web layouts that are genuinely impressive, showing both technical skill and creative vision. These are really good, I say, scrolling through his portfolio. You have a natural eye for composition and color. Thanks, he says, but I can hear the wariness in his voice. Like he's waiting for the criticism that he expects to follow any compliment. I'm serious. This is professional quality work. With the right mentorship and networking opportunities, you could definitely build a career around this. That's what I'm hoping, he says. But I need guidance from someone who understands the industry, who can help me figure out how to position myself and find clients. Someone who's not my sister. I understand what he's saying, and part of me respects his desire to succeed on his own terms rather than relying on family connections. But another part of me is frustrated that he'd rather work with a stranger than accept help from someone who cares about him. Our program could definitely help with that. I say we have several mentors who work in creative fields, and they're specifically trained to help people navigate career transitions. Would it be weird for you if I applied? No, I say immediately, then pause to consider whether that's actually true. Maybe a little weird, but good weird. I'd be proud to have you in the program, even if it means admitting that your own family needed the kind of help you've been providing to other people. The question cuts to the heart of something I've been avoiding for years. There's always been a tension between my public narrative about overcoming foster care and the private reality that my relationship with Leo, the person who shared that experience most directly, has been complicated and sometimes painful, especially. Then, I say, maybe it's time I stop treating our family stuff as separate from the work I'm doing. Leo smiles for the first time since he sat down. and I see a glimpse of the person he was before life wore him down so thoroughly, you know. What's funny, I used to resent how much time you spent building Menthora because it felt like you were choosing strangers over family. But now I think maybe Menthora is your way of taking care of family, just a much bigger family than the two of us. His insight surprises me with its generosity, and I feel something shifting in my understanding of the choices I've made. Maybe? The tension between helping Leo and building Menthora was always false. Maybe taking care of him individually and creating systems to help people like us were never mutually exclusive goals. I should have done better at staying connected with you during those early years, I tell him. I was so focused on proving that I could succeed that I forgot success doesn't mean much if you don't have people to share it with. We both could have done better, he says. I was probably harder to stay connected with than you realized. Success felt threatening to me for a long time. Even when it was your success, we sit quietly for a moment, and I realize this is the most honest conversation Leo and I've had in years. It's also the first time I've been able to see our relationship from his perspective, to understand how my drive to succeed might have felt like abandonment to someone who was still struggling with the basic challenges of stability and self-worth. Can I ask you something? I say, sure. Do you think people can really change? Like, fundamentally change who they are? He considers the question seriously. I think people can change their circumstances and their habits. I'm not sure they can change their essential nature. Why? I tell him about my conversation with Rory, about the apology and the job interview, and my uncertainty about whether someone who once dismissed my dreams deserves a chance to be part of making them reality. Sounds like you're trying to decide whether to be vindictive or generous. Leo says when I finish, I guess that's one way to put it. What would the person who started Menthora do? I think about my younger self, the one who was so determined to prove that business could be a force for good, who believed that everyone deserved opportunities to show their potential. That person would probably give Rory a chance, not because he deserved it based on past behavior, but because the mission was always bigger than any individual grievance. She'd probably hire him, I admit. Then maybe that's your answer. Leo is right, and suddenly the decision feels clear in a way it hasn't all day. Hiring Rory isn't about forgiveness or vindication or even justice. It's about staying true to the values that built Menthora in the first place, especially when it's complicated and uncomfortable. I should get going, Leo says, checking his phone. But I'm glad we talked. Really glad? Me too, I say, and Leo, apply too. The program. Let's see what happens when we both stop being so careful around each other. As I watch him walk out into the Brooklyn evening, I feel something I haven't experienced in a long time, genuine hope about our relationship. Maybe success doesn't have to be lonely if you're willing to let the people who matter most see all the complicated parts of who you've become. I'm sitting in my office the next morning, preparing to call Maya Chen with a job offer, when Selene burst through my door with an expression I've never seen before, part shock, part anger, part something. That might be fear. We have a problem, she says, closing the door behind her and leaning against it as if she's trying to keep something out. What kind of problem? She sets her laptop on my desk and turns it toward me. On the screen is a TechCrunch article with the headline, Menthora CEO's former classmate claims company idea was stolen from joint business school project. My stomach drops as I read the subheading. Rory Danzig alleges that SoWin's billion-dollar mentorship platform was based on research and concepts developed during their time at Columbia Business School. This can't be real, I say, scrolling down to read the article. But there it is, Rory's name, quotes attributed to him, even a photo from our business school directory that makes us both look impossibly young. According to the article, Rory contacted TechCrunch yesterday afternoon, claiming that the idea for Menthora was originally developed as part of a group project he worked on with me and to other students in Professor Granger's Advanced Business Strategy class. He alleges that I took the concept and built the company without acknowledging his contributions or offering him equity. This is completely fabricated, I tell Selene. We never worked on any group project together. The presentation I gave that day was my own research, my own ideas. I know that, she says. The question is, can you prove it? I stare at the screen, reading Rory's quotes with growing disbelief. He claims to have documentation of his contributions, emails and notes from our supposed collaboration. He describes the mentorship platform concept in enough detail to make it sound plausible that he could have been involved in its development. This is why he apologized yesterday. I realized suddenly he was setting me up, making me think he'd changed, that he was genuinely remorseful, when really he was just gathering information for this attack. Selene sits down across from my desk, her expression grim. There's more. He's not just talking to TechCrunch. He's hired a lawyer, and they've sent us a cease and desist letter demanding that we either acknowledge his co-founder status or face a lawsuit for intellectual property theft. The room seems to tilt slightly, and I have to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. 10 years of work, everything I've built, everything I've accomplished. Suddenly, it all feels fragile, vulnerable to someone who's willing to lie about the past to claim a piece of my success. Where's the letter? Selene hands me a thick envelope with the law firm's letterhead. I tear it open and scan the contents, which are even worse than I expected. Rory's attorney is claiming not just that he co-developed the initial concept, but that he has documentation proving ongoing contributions to the company's early development. They're demanding 50% equity in Menthara and threatening to seek damages for what they claim are years of stolen profits. 50%. I say out loud, hardly believing what I'm reading. He wants half the company, based on what evidence? That's what we need to find out. I reach for my phone to call our legal team, then stop. Wait, before we do anything else, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I open my laptop and pull up the Google Drive folder where I keep all my old files from business school. Most of it is probably useless lecture notes, assignment drafts, research papers on topics I can barely remember. But somewhere in there should be documentation of my original presentation, the one that Rory and everyone else laughed at. Here, I say, finding the file and opening it. This is the original PowerPoint from my presentation in Professor Granger's class. Look at the creation date October 15, 2013, and look at the version history. Selene leans over to examine the screen. The file properties show that it was created on my personal laptop, last modified the night before my presentation, with no other contributors or editors. It's not definitive proof that I worked alone, but it's a start. What about your research notes? She asks, the interviews you did with foster kids, the data you collected on mentorship outcomes. I spend the next 20 minutes digging through old files, finding pieces of the work I'd done to prepare for that presentation. Interview transcripts from conversations with social workers. Statistical analysis of mentorship program effectiveness. Market research on existing platforms and their limitations. All of it dated months before the class presentation. All of it created on my personal devices. All of it showing no collaboration with Rory or anyone else. This should be enough to prove that the idea was mine, I say. But even as I'm saying it, I realize it might not matter. Legal battles aren't always won by the side with the truth. They're often won by the side with the better story, the more convincing narrative, the deeper pockets to sustain a long fight. My phone buzzes with a call from an unknown number. I almost don't answer, but something makes me pick up. Calypso Wynn. I say, Ms. Wynn, this is David Chan from the Wall Street Journal. I'm calling about the allegations that have been made regarding the origins of your company. Do you have any comment? I hang up without responding. but the phone immediately starts ringing again. Different number, different reporter, same question. Then my email inbox starts pinging with interview requests from business journalists, tech bloggers, and even some mainstream news outlets. This is moving fast, Selene observes, watching my phone continue to buzz with incoming calls. Too fast, I agree. Rory must have coordinated this perfectly, release the story, file the legal threat, and get maximum media coverage all at the same time. I'm trying to figure out our next move when my phone rings with a call from Professor Granger. I stare at his name on the screen, remembering that I still haven't responded to his request for me to speak to his current students. I should take this, I tell Selene. Ms. Wynne, Professor Granger says when I answer. I've just seen the most disturbing article about you and one of your former classmates. I felt I should call immediately. Professor Granger, I say carefully. I assume you're referring to Rory Danzig's allegations. Indeed, and I must tell you, I find them completely without merit. I remember your presentation from that semester very clearly, and I can state categorically that it was your individual work, not a group project. Relief floods through me so suddenly that I have to sit down. You remember the presentation? Of course, I remember it. It was one of the most thoughtful pieces of work submitted in that class, which is precisely why the reaction from your classmates was so disappointing. I'm afraid I didn't do enough to discourage their behaviour that day. This is not what I expected. To hear from the man who had presided over my public humiliation. You thought my presentation was thoughtful. Ms. Wynne, I may be old-fashioned in my pedagogical methods, but I'm not blind to innovation. Your analysis of the mentorship gap in foster care services was rigorous and insightful. The reason your classmates reacted so negatively was because you were proposing something they couldn't understand, using technology for social impact rather than pure profit maximization. I'm quiet for a moment, trying to reconcile this version of events with my memory of that day. Then why didn't you say anything when they were laughing at me? Because I believed then incorrectly. I now realize that facing skepticism would make you more determined to prove your concept viable. I thought the challenge would strengthen your resolve. He pauses. I deeply regret that approach. It was pedagogically unsound and personally cruel. Another apology I wasn't expecting, from another person I'd written off as irredeemably opposed to my success. But unlike Rory's apology yesterday, this one feels genuine, uncomplicated by ulterior motives. I need to ask you something, I say. Would you be willing to provide a statement about my presentation? Something that confirms it was individual work, not a group project. Absolutely. In fact, I've already reached out to TechCrunch to correct their story. I have my gradebook from that semester, which shows clear documentation of individual assignments and group projects. Your mentorship platform presentation was decidedly the former. After we hang up, I fill Selene in on the conversation. For the first time since she walked into my office with the article, I feel like we might be able to fight. That's huge, she says. Having your professor confirm that it wasn't a group project undermines Rory's entire claim, but he says he has documentation. Emails, notes, evidence of collaboration. What if he's fabricated all of that? Then we'll prove it's fabricated, she says firmly. But Cal, you need to think about something else. Even if we can prove that Rory is lying, the damage to your reputation might already be done. People are going to remember the allegations, even if they're eventually disproven. She's right. And the thought terrifies me. I've spent 10 years building credibility in an industry that's quick to dismiss women, people of colour, anyone who doesn't fit the traditional entrepreneur profile. One false accusation of intellectual property theft could undo all of that progress. There's something else, Selene says, looking uncomfortable. I got a call this morning from Maya Chen. She saw the article and wanted to know if this changes anything about the job offer, my heart sinks. Maya is exactly the kind of thoughtful, ethical person who would be concerned about joining a company facing accusations of stolen intellectual property. Even if we can prove the accusations are false, the fact that they exist might be enough to scare away the kind of talent we need. What did you tell her? That we'd be in touch once we understand the situation better. But Cal, if this drags out, we're going to lose good people. Employees, mentors, maybe even some of our non-profit partners. The full scope of what Rory has done is starting to become clear. This isn't just an attack on me personally, it's an attack on everything Menthora represents, everyone who depends on us, every young person whose mentorship connection might be disrupted if our reputation is destroyed. We need to get ahead of this. I say, I want you to schedule a press conference for this afternoon. I'm going to tell our side of the story before Rory can do any more damage. Are you sure that's wise? Shouldn't we wait to hear what our lawyers advise? Our lawyers are going to tell us to stay quiet and let them handle it through proper channels. But this isn't just a legal battle, it's a battle for public perception. And we can't win that by staying silent. As Selene starts making calls to arrange the press conference, I sit alone in my office, trying to process everything that's happened in the last hour. Yesterday, I was debating whether to give Rory a second chance based on what seemed like genuine remorse and growth. Today, I'm preparing to fight him in court and in the media to protect everything I've built. The cruelest part is that his strategy is actually brilliant. By positioning himself as a co-founder who was cheated out of his rightful stake in the company, he's made it almost impossible for me to respond without seeming defensive or vindictive. If I attack his character or point out his history of failure, I look petty. If I focus solely on the facts, I risk seeming cold and calculating. But there's one thing Rory didn't count on. I have 10 years of proof that the values I built Menthora on are real. Every mentor we've trained, every young person we've connected with opportunities, every success story that started with our platform, all of that is evidence of who I really am and what I actually care about. The truth isn't just in the files on my laptop or the statements from Professor Granger. The truth is in the work itself, in the lives that have been changed, in the company culture that attracts people like Selene and Maya who want to be part of something meaningful. Rory can lie about the past, but he can't fake a decade of authentic impact, and that's going to have to be enough. The press conference is scheduled for 3 o'clock, which gives me for hours to prepare for what might be the most important presentation of my life. I've given dozens of speeches about Menthora to investors, at conferences, to congressional committees examining youth services, but I've never had to defend the basic legitimacy of my work while standing in front of cameras that will broadcast my words to anyone looking for reasons to doubt my success. Selene has transformed our main conference room into a makeshift press room, complete with a backdrop featuring our logo and the tagline that's guided us from the beginning, connecting potential with opportunity. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm about to fight for my company's survival in front of the words that started this whole journey. We've got confirmations from TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and about a dozen other outlets, Selene reports, checking her tablet, plus local news and some podcast journalists. It's going to be a full room, I nod, trying to project confidence I don't entirely feel. Any word from our legal team? They strongly advise against saying anything that could be construed as defamatory toward Rory, even if it's true. They want you to stick to facts about your own work and avoid speculating about his motives. That's going to be challenging, since my instinct is to explain exactly what kind of person would fabricate a decade-old collaboration to steal credit for someone else's success. But I understand their caution. The last thing we need is a defamation lawsuit on top of the intellectual property claims. What about Professor Granger's statement? He sent over a formal affidavit confirming that your presentation was individual work, not a group project. He also included copies of the syllabus and assignment descriptions from that semester, which make it clear that the mentorship platform was your independent research. I feel a surge of gratitude toward my former professor, mixed with regret about the years I spent resenting him for not defending me that day. His support now doesn't erase the harm that was done, but it does provide crucial credibility for our response. My phone buzzes with a text from Leo. Saw the news. This is bullshit and everyone knows it. You've got this. His support means more to me than he probably realizes, especially coming so soon after our conversation about family loyalty and competing priorities. Despite all the ways our relationship has been complicated over the years, Leo knows me well enough to understand that I would never build a career on stolen ideas. Another text comes in, this one from an unknown number. This is just the beginning. You think you can steal from people and face no consequences. There's more coming. I show the message to Selene, who immediately forwards it to our legal team. Probably from Rory or someone working with him, she says. We should document everything in case this escalates beyond the current claims. The possibility that this might escalate further hadn't occurred to me, but it makes sense. If Rory is willing to fabricate evidence about intellectual property theft, what else might he be willing to do to damage my reputation and claim a piece of my success? I spend the next hour reviewing all the documentation we've gathered, my original presentation files, research notes, interview transcripts, email correspondence from the early days of building Menthora. The timeline is clear and consistent. Everything was my individual work, developed over months of research and refined through years of iteration and feedback from actual users. But as I'm going through the files, I realize something that makes my stomach clench. There's a gap in my documentation. Most of my really early work, the initial concept sketches, the first user interviews, the preliminary market research was done on an old laptop that crashed in 2015. I'd managed to recover most of the important files, but some of the timestamps and version histories were lost in the process. This could be a problem, I tell Selene, explaining the gap in documentation. If Rory has fabricated emails or notes from 2013 and 2014, we might not have complete records to contradict his timeline, but we have Professor Granger's statement. And we have the files that did survive. Plus, we have 10 years of business records showing how the company actually developed. She's right. But I'm learning that legal battles aren't always won by the side with the most truth. They're sometimes won by the side that can create the most doubt about the other's version of events. At 2:30, I'm in the bathroom, checking my appearance one final time before facing the cameras. The woman looking back at me from the mirror has come a long way from the nervous 22-year-old who stood in front of Professor Granger's class a decade ago. She's wearing a blazer that costs more than I used to make in a month. Her hair is professionally styled, and her expression carries the kind of confidence that comes from years of proving skeptics wrong. But underneath all that polish, I can see traces of the younger version, the one who wasn't sure anyone would ever take her seriously, who spent nights lying awake wondering if maybe the critics were right, and she was just deluding herself about her own potential. Ready? Selene asks, knocking on the door. As I'll ever be. The conference room is packed with journalists, cameras, and recording equipment. I recognize some faces from previous Menthora events, but others are clearly here because controversy sells better than success stories. There's an energy in the room that feels different from my usual speaking engagements, sharper, more skeptical, hungry for drama. I take my place behind the podium, looking out at the sea of faces and cameras, and take a deep breath. Everything I've worked for over the past 10 years comes down to the next 20 minutes. Thank you all for coming. I begin. I'm here to address the allegations that have been made about the origins of Menthora and to set the record straight about how this company was actually founded. I start with the facts, walking through the timeline of my work in chronological order. The research I conducted in early 2013 on mentorship outcomes for Forster youth. The months I spent developing my initial business plan, the presentation I gave in Professor Granger's Advanced Business Strategy class in October 2013, that presentation was met with skepticism and, frankly, ridicule from many of my classmates. I say, looking directly into the cameras. Some suggested that my focus on social impact was naive, that technology-enabled mentorship was commercially unviable. I disagreed then, and 10 years of success has proven them wrong. I can see some journalists taking notes, others typing on laptops, a few whispering to colleagues. The room feels charged with the kind of attention that can either elevate or destroy a reputation. I want to be absolutely clear about one thing. I continue. The idea for Menthara was my individual work, based on my personal experience in Forster care and my independent research into the mentorship gap affecting underserved youth. It was not a group project, it was not collaborative work, and it was not based on anyone else's contributions. A hand shoots up from the audience, Ms. Wynne. Mr. Danzig claims to have emails and notes documenting his involvement in developing the mentorship platform concept. How do you respond to that? I welcome Mr. Danzig to produce any authentic documentation of collaboration between us, I say. What he will not be able to produce is any evidence that we worked together on this concept, because we never did. Professor Granger, who taught the class where I first presented this idea, has provided a sworn statement confirming that it was individual work. Another journalist. But isn't it possible that informal collaboration happened outside of class? Assignments? Maybe conversations or brainstorming sessions that weren't officially documented. Mr. Danzig and I were not friends in business school, I say carefully. We did not study together, we did not brainstorm together, and we certainly did not collaborate. On research projects, our interactions were limited to classroom settings, where his response to my ideas was generally dismissive. I'm walking a fine line here, trying to be honest about our relationship without saying anything that could be construed as defamatory. But the questions keep coming, each one designed to poke holes in my narrative or find inconsistencies in my timeline, Ms. Wynne. Critics might say that you're just trying to rewrite history now that your company is successful. How can people trust your version of events when there's clearly a dispute about what actually happened? This is the question I've been dreading because it gets to the heart of why Rory's strategy is so insidious. By creating doubt about the past, he's forcing me to prove a negative to demonstrate that something didn't happen, rather than showing evidence that it did. I understand why people might be confused by conflicting claims. I say, but I would ask them to look at the pattern of evidence we've presented. Look at the timeline of my research and development work. Look at Professor Granger's statement about the class assignments. Look at the business records showing how Menthara actually grew from concept to reality. I pause, letting that sink in, then continue with what I hope will be the most compelling part of my argument. But more than that, I would ask people to look at the work itself. Over the past 10 years, Menthara has connected more than 50,000 young people with mentors who have helped them pursue education, find employment, and build the kind of support networks that change lives. We've trained thousands of mentors, partnered with hundreds of nonprofits, and built a platform that reflects deep understanding of what underserved communities actually need. The room is quiet now, and I can feel the attention focusing in a way that suggests people are really listening. That kind of authentic impact doesn't come from stolen ideas or fabricated concepts. It comes from genuine commitment to the mission, sustained effort over many years, and the kind of personal understanding that can only come from having lived the problems you're trying to solve. A journalist from Forbes raises her hand. Ms. Wynne, what's your next step in responding to these allegations? Will you be pursuing legal action against Mr. Danzig? We will defend ourselves vigorously against any false claims. I say, but our primary focus remains what it's always been, serving the young people who depend on our platform and the mentors who volunteer their time to support them. We won't let these distractions derail our mission. After a few more questions, I wrap up the press conference and head back to my office, emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic. The journalists seem to take my responses seriously, and I managed to get through the entire session without saying anything that our lawyers will want to walk back. How do you think it went? I asked Selene as we review the initial media coverage. Better than I expected, she says. You came across as credible and substantive. And the fact that you have Professor Granger's support really strengthens your position. As the afternoon progresses, articles start appearing online with headlines that are more balanced than this morning's coverage. Menthora CEO disputes collaboration claims, provides timeline documentation, and business professor confirms students' individual work on mentorship platform concept. But I know this is just the beginning. Rory's legal team will respond to our press conference, probably with more allegations or supposed evidence. The story will continue to evolve, and public opinion will shift based on who seems more credible, who has better documentation, who tells a more convincing story. My phone rings with a call from Maya Chen. Ms. Wynne, she says when I answer, I saw your press conference this afternoon. I wanted you to know that I still very much want to work for Menthora, regardless of these allegations. Relief floods through me. Thank you. Maya, that means more than you know. I've been following your company for years, she continues. I've seen the impact you've had, the lives you've changed. Whatever some guy from business school claims about ancient history, the work speaks for itself. After we hang up, I realize that Maya has articulated something important. The work does speak for itself. 10 years of authentic impact, thousands of success stories, a company culture built around genuine commitment to social change, all of that matters more than whatever lies Rory can fabricate about the past. But as I'm finally starting to feel optimistic about weathering this crisis, Selene walks into my office with an expression that immediately puts me on alert. We have another problem, she says, setting her laptop on my desk. Rory just filed an injunction trying to freeze Menthora's assets until the intellectual property dispute is resolved. I stare at the legal document on her screen, trying to process what this means. If a judge grants the injunction, we could be prevented from operating the business while the lawsuit plays out. No new mentorship connections, no payroll for employees, no funding for the non-profits that depend on our platform. Rory isn't just trying to steal credit for my success, he's trying to destroy everything I've built in the process. How long do we have? I ask. The hearing is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Our lawyers are preparing a response, but they say it's going to be close. If the judge believes there's any merit to Rory's claims, they might err on the side of caution and grant a temporary injunction. I look out my window at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about all the young people who are scheduled to have mentorship calls this week, all the mentors who volunteer their time because they believe in what we're doing, all the employees who've built their careers around our mission. Tomorrow morning, a judge who doesn't know any of us will decide whether Rory's lies are credible enough to shut down 10 years of authentic work. The stakes couldn't be higher. And I have less than 18 hours to figure out how to save everything I've built. I'm in the courthouse at 7 a.m., 3 hours before our hearing, sitting in an empty hallway with our legal team and trying to prepare for what might be the most important 90 minutes of my professional life. Our lead attorney, Sarah Martinez, has been working since midnight to compile evidence that Rory's claims are fabricated. But her expression suggests she's not entirely confident about our chances. The problem, she explains for the third time, is that judges are on the side of caution in intellectual property disputes. If there's any possibility that legitimate claims are being made, They'll often grant temporary injunctions to preserve the status quo while the case plays out. But we have Professor Granger's statement. I protest. We have my original files. The timeline documentation, everything that proves the work was mine. And Rory's team has emails and notes that they claim prove collaboration. The judge won't have time to evaluate which evidence is authentic and which is fabricated. They're just looking at whether there's enough of a dispute to justify freezing assets. The emails Rory's lawyer provided are sophisticated for juries, complete with what appear to be legitimate timestamps and metadata. They show conversations between Rory and me discussing various aspects of the mentorship platform, sharing research, debating implementation strategies. If I didn't know they were fake, I might find them convincing myself. How is this possible? I ask, how can someone just fabricate evidence and have it taken seriously in a court of law? Because initial hearings like this aren't about determining truth, Sarah explains. They're about preventing irreparable harm while the legal system has time to sort out competing claims. Rory's argument is that if his intellectual property is being used without permission, every day Menthora operates causes him financial damage that can't be undone. At 8:30, I see Rory and his legal team walking down the hallway toward the courtroom. He's wearing an expensive suit that suggests his financial situation has improved dramatically since his job interview 2 days ago, though I suspect is. Sudden prosperity is related to whatever backer is funding this legal attack. Our eyes meet for a moment, and I see something in his expression that chills me, satisfaction, mixed with what might be pity. He thinks he's already won. Ms. Wynne, his lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who introduced himself as Patrick Kellner, approaches our group. My client wanted me to extend one final offer before we go into court. I'm listening, Sarah says, though her tone suggests she's not optimistic about whatever's coming. Mr. Danzig is prepared to drop all claims and withdraw the injunction. Request in exchange for 40% equity in Menthora and formal recognition as co-founder. He believes this is a generous offer, considering the strength of his claims. I stare at Kellner in disbelief. 40% of a company he had nothing to do with building, for work he never did. You call that generous? My client believes. It's more than fair compensation for his contributions to the original concept. Your client is a liar, I say, before Sarah can stop me. And if he thinks I'm going to hand over 40% of my life's work to avoid a legal fight, he severely underestimated my determination. Kellner shrugs as if my response was expected. Then I suppose we'll see what the judge thinks about the evidence. As they walk away, I feel a surge of anger that's almost overwhelming. The casual entitlement in Rory's offer the assumption that he can simply claim ownership of my work and I'll capitulate to avoid confrontation reveals everything wrong with the systems that have always favored people like him over people like me. Are you ready for this? Sarah asks as we enter the courtroom. No, I say honestly. But I'm ready to fight. Judge Patricia Henley takes the bench at exactly 9 a.m. And I can tell immediately that she's the kind of person who values efficiency over sentiment. She's probably seen dozens of cases like this, ambitious people fighting over who deserves credit for success. And she's not going to be swayed by emotional appeals. Rory's lawyer presents first, laying out their theory of the case with smooth confidence. According to his narrative, Rory and I were study partners in business school who collaborated extensively on developing the mentorship platform concept. He presents the forged emails as evidence, along with what he claims are contemporaneous notes from their brainstorming sessions. Your Honor, Kellner says, Mr. Danzig has been watching for 10 years as Ms. Wynne built a multi-million-dollar company based on concepts they developed together. He's repeatedly attempted to resolve this matter privately, but Ms. Wynne has refused to acknowledge his contributions or provide appropriate compensation. The lies are so brazen, so completely disconnected from reality, that I have to grip the edge of my chair to keep from standing up and shouting. But I force myself to stay silent, trusting that our evidence will speak more effectively than my outrage. When it's our turn, Sarah methodically presents our case. Professor Granger's affidavit confirming individual work. My original research files and presentation materials. The timeline showing months of independent development before I ever gave the class presentation. Your Honour, Sarah argues, the evidence clearly shows that Ms. Wynn's work was individual research conducted over several months, presented as an individual assignment in Professor Granger's class. Mr. Danzig's alleged collaboration is contradicted by the academic record and by the testimony of the professor who assigned and graded the work. Judge Henley asks pointed questions about the timestamps on Rory's emails, the metadata analysis our technical team performed, the specific claims being made about collaboration. But I can't read her expression, can't tell whether she's buying our argument or finding Rory's case credible. Then she asks the question I've been dreading, Ms. Wynne. Is it possible that you and Mr. Danzig had informal discussions about your research outside of the formal class structure? Conversations that might not have been documented in your academic files. I stand up, knowing that my answer to this question could determine the fate of my company. Your Honour, Mr. Danzig and I were not friends in business school. We did not study together, socialise together, or collaborate on any projects. The only interactions I remember with him were in classroom settings, where his response to my ideas was consistently dismissive and often cruel. I can see Rory's lawyer taking notes, probably preparing to object to my characterization of his client's behaviour. But Judge Henley holds up a hand to stop him. Ms. Wynne, can you be more specific about these classroom interactions? This is my moment, the chance to explain not just what happened, but why Rory's current claims are so fundamentally inconsistent with his past behaviour. Your Honour, when I presented my mentorship platform concept in Professor Granger's class, Mr. Danzig was one of the students who laughed at the idea. He called it emotionally manipulative and suggested that I was naive about what business requires. The suggestion that he was secretly collaborating with me on this concept while publicly ridiculing it is simply not credible. Judge Henley turns to Rory's lawyer. Mr. Kellner, how does your client explain this apparent contradiction? Kellner stands, looking less confident than he did at the beginning of the hearing. Your Honour, my client acknowledges that he may have been overly critical during the class presentation, but he maintains that their private collaboration was separate from classroom dynamics. Students often engage in competitive behaviour in academic settings while working together privately. It's a reasonable-sounding explanation, but I can see Judge Henley considering whether it's actually plausible. Would someone really collaborate on developing an idea and then publicly mark it in front of the professor and other students? I'd like to hear from Mr. Danzig directly. Judge Henley says, Mr. Danzig, please explain to me how you reconcile your alleged collaboration with Ms. Wynne with your public criticism of her work. Rory stands up, and for a moment, I see a flash of the uncertainty that's been hidden beneath his confident facade. He knows he's about to lie under oath, and despite everything he's done, I don't think perjury comes naturally to him. Your Honour, he begins, I was young and competitive in business school. I thought that criticising other students' ideas would make my own work look better by comparison. It was immature, and I regret it. But it doesn't change the fact that Calypso and I worked together on developing the mentorship platform concept, and you have documentation of this collaboration. Yes, Your Honour, the emails my attorney submitted show months of back and forth discussion about various aspects of the platform. Judge Henley shuffles through the papers in front of her, examining the printed emails. Mr. Danzig, these emails show detailed technical discussions about platform architecture, user interface design, and business model development. Are you telling me that you and Ms. When we're collaborating on these advanced concepts while you were still in your first semester of business school. I feel a surge of hope. Judge Henley has identified something that I hadn't fully appreciated: the technical sophistication of the conversations in Rory's fidged emails is inconsistent with what first-year business students would have been discussing in 2013. Rory hesitates, clearly realizing that his lawyer may have made the fabricated evidence too detailed. To advance for the timeline they're claiming, well, Your Honour, we were both very ambitious students, and Calypso had done extensive research on technology platforms. Mr. Danzig, Judge Henley interrupts. These emails discuss specific programming languages, database architectures, and user experience principles that I would not expect first-year business students to be debating. Can you explain how you acquired this technical knowledge as a business student? The courtroom is completely silent as Rory struggles to answer. His lawyer is taking notes furiously, probably realizing that their fabricated evidence has created a credibility problem they didn't anticipate. I had taken some computer science courses as an undergraduate, Rory says finally, and I was entrusted in the technology side of business development. Judge Henley turns to me. Ms. Wynne, what was your technical background when you were developing this concept? Your Honour, I was teaching myself programming and platform development while working full-time at a coffee shop after I left business school. The technical details in those alleged emails represent knowledge I didn't acquire until 2014 and 2015, long after any contact with Mr. Danzig had ended. I can see understanding dawning in Judge Henley's expression. The timeline doesn't work. The technical complexity doesn't match the academic level. The whole story is falling apart under scrutiny. Mr. Kellner, Judge Henley says, I'm troubled by several inconsistencies in your client's claims. The academic record shows individual work. The timeline doesn't support the technical complexity of the alleged collaboration, and the behavioral description seems inconsistent with the claimed relationship. Kellner stands up, looking less polished than he did an hour ago. Your Honour, even if there are questions about specific details, the fundamental fact remains that my client contributed to the original concept that became Menthora. The exact nature of that collaboration may be complex, but the core claim of intellectual property theft stands. Mr. Kellner, without credible evidence of collaboration, there is no basis for claims of intellectual property theft. And frankly, the evidence your client has provided raises more questions than it answers. Judge Henley pauses, looking directly at Rory. Mr. Danzig, are you prepared to testify under oath that every email and document you've submitted as evidence is authentic and unaltered? The question hangs in the air like a challenge. Rory looks at his lawyer, then back at the judge, and I can see him calculating whether he's willing to commit perjury to pursue his false claims. Your Honour, he says finally, I believe the evidence accurately represents my recollection of our collaboration. It's a carefully worded long answer, designed to avoid outright perjury while maintaining his position. But Judge Henley is too experienced to be fooled by semantic games. Mr. Danzig, that's not what I asked you. Are these documents authentic? The silence stretches out until it becomes unbearable. Finally, Rory speaks in a voice that's barely audible. Your Honour, I may have been mistaken about some of the details. Mr. Kellner, Judge Henley says, turning to Rory's lawyer with obvious displeasure. Does your client wish to withdraw his application for injunctive relief? Kellner whispers urgently with Rory for several minutes before standing up. Your Honour, in light of the questions that have been raised, my client withdraws his request for emergency injunctive relief. Motion denied as withdrawn, Judge Henley says firmly. And Mr. Kellner, I strongly suggest you advise your client about the serious legal consequences of submitting false evidence to this court. As we walk out of the courthouse, I feel a mixture of relief and exhaustion that's almost overwhelming. We've won this battle, but I know the war isn't over. Rory can still pursue his claims in a full trial, though Judge Henley's skepticism about his evidence will make that much more difficult. How do you feel? Sarah asks as we reach the street. Like, I just dodged a bullet, I say, but also like I shouldn't have had to. My phone is buzzing with notifications, journalists who want to report on the hearing, employees who are relieved that the company won't be shut down, mentors and mentees who are worried about the future of their relationships. But the text that matters most is from Leo. Saw the news. You destroyed him. Proud of you. As I head back to the office to address our team and reassure our partners, I realize that this experience has taught me something important about the nature of success. And the people who try to tear it down. Rory's attack wasn't really about intellectual property or fairness, or even money. It was about the rage of someone who couldn't accept that the person he dismissed as irrelevant had built something he could never achieve himself. The best response to that kind of attack isn't anger or revenge, it's simply continuing to do the work that made you successful in the first place. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the same conference room where I held the press conference that helped save my company. But this time the atmosphere is celebratory rather than defensive. We're announcing Menthora's expansion into 3 new cities and the launch of our adult career transition program, the one Leo inspired me to create. The past half year has been a whirlwind of growth, recognition, and healing. Rory's lawsuit was formally dismissed 3 months ago when his legal team couldn't produce any authentic evidence of collaboration. More importantly, the failed attack seemed to validate everything we'd built. Our user base has grown by 30%. We've attracted new investors who specifically cited our integrity during the crisis. And we've been contacted by dozens of other companies facing similar false claims who want to learn from our response. Maya Chen is sitting to my left, having become one of our most valuable team members and a brilliant strategic thinker. To my right is Selene, who was recently promoted to Chief Operating Officer in recognition of her leadership during the crisis and her vision for our future growth. But the person I'm most excited to introduce today is Leo, who's joining us as our first participant in the Career Transition Program. His graphic design portfolio has evolved dramatically over the past 6 months, and he's already landing freelance clients through connections he's made with our mentor network. I want to start today by reflecting on what we've learned about the importance of authentic mission-driven work. I say to the room full of journalists, investors, and team members. 6 months ago, someone tried to claim ownership of Menthora's story by fabricating a collaboration that never existed. That attack failed not because we had better lawyers or more resources, but because 10 years of authentic impact speaks louder than any false narrative. I pause, looking around the room at faces that represent everything I love about this work: young people who found mentors through our platform, professionals who volunteer their time because they believe in our mission, employees who chose Menthora because they wanted to be part of something meaningful. The truth is, no one can steal the real foundation of what we've built here, because that foundation isn't an idea or a business plan. It's relationships, it's trust, it's the accumulated impact of thousands of connections between people who needed opportunities and people who were willing to provide them. After the formal presentation, I find myself in conversation with Professor Granger, who accepted my invitation to join our advisory board. His support during the legal crisis helped establish his credibility as someone who understands both the academic rigor behind our work and the real-world impact we're achieving. I've been thinking about that day in my classroom 10 years ago. He tells me about how differently I might have handled the situation if I'd understood what you were really proposing. You couldn't have known, I say. None of us could have predicted how the technology would develop or how much need there would be for this kind of connection. Perhaps not. But I could have responded to the cruelty with more wisdom. I could have used that moment to teach something. about intellectual generosity instead of allowing competitive dismissal to dominate the conversation. His reflection reminds me of something I've learned through this whole experience. People can change, grow, and develop better versions of themselves, even when their initial instincts are flawed or harmful. Professor Granger's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and contribute to our success now matters more than his failure to defend me a decade ago. I'm grateful for your support, I tell him. Both now and during the hearing, it made all the difference. It was the least I could do, he says. Though I must admit, I'm also selfishly excited to be associated with work that's having real impact. Academic careers don't always provide opportunities to see research translated into changes in people's lives. As the reception winds down, I walk through our office spaces, looking at the walls, covered with photos and letters from mentorship success stories. There's Maria, who is connected with a financial advisor through our platform and just bought her first house. There's Deshawn, whose mentor helped him navigate the college application process and who's now studying engineering at Howard University. There's Jennifer, who found a marketing mentor through our adult transition program and just launched her own consulting business. Each photo represents not just individual success, but proof that the vision I presented in Professor Granger's class was actually viable, actually important, actually worth the decade of work it took to make it real. Selene finds me in front of the success story wall, holding 2 cups of coffee, the good stuff, the kind we can afford now that we're successful. But that still reminds me of the bitter bodega coffee that sustained me through the early years. Penny for your thoughts, she says, handing me one of the cups. Just thinking about how different things look from this side of success, I say. 10 years ago, I thought proving myself would feel like vindication. Instead, it feels like responsibility. Responsibility for what? For all the people who depend on what we've built. For maintaining the authenticity that made this work in the first place. For not letting success make me forget what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated. We stand in comfortable silence for a moment, and I realize how much I value having Selene as both a colleague and a friend. She's seen me through the worst crisis of my professional life, and she's also helped me recognize opportunities for growth that I might have missed if I'd been managing everything alone. Speaking of responsibility, she says, have you decided what you're going to do about the speaking request from Columbia Business School? Professor Granger has invited me to address his current students, the same class where I was humiliated a decade ago. Part of me wants to accept the invitation as a form of poetic justice, returning as the successful CEO to the classroom, where I was laughed at as a naive student. But another part of me worries about my motives, about whether speaking there would be about inspiring current students or settling old scores. I think I'm going to do it, I say, but not for the reasons I initially wanted to. What do you mean? I want to talk to them about the difference between confidence and competence, about the importance of intellectual humility, about what happens when you dismiss ideas simply because they come from someone you don't expect to have valuable insights. That sounds like it could be a powerful conversation. I hope so. I want to make sure that if there's another 22-year-old in that classroom with an idea that seems naive or idealistic, they get a different response than I did. My phone buzzes with a text from Leo. Dinner Sunday. I want to show you my latest project. I text back. Absolutely. Can't wait to see it. Our relationship has transformed over the past 6 months in ways that feel both natural and miraculous. Leo's participation in our mentorship program has given us a framework for talking about professional development and personal growth that doesn't carry the baggage of our complicated family history. More importantly, it's allowed me to see him as the talented, determined person he's always been, rather than just the struggling brother I felt responsible for helping. As I'm getting ready to leave the office, Maya stops by with a portfolio of marketing materials she's been developing for our expansion launch. Her work is sophisticated, creative, and perfectly aligned with our mission, exactly what I hoped for when I decided to hire her despite the chaos of Rory's attack. These look incredible, I tell her, reviewing her campaign concepts. How are you feeling about everything, the expansion, the new responsibilities, all the attention we've been getting? Honestly, it's exciting and terrifying in equal measure, she says. But I keep thinking about how many more young people will be able to help if we can scale this successfully. Her answer reminds me why I'm so committed to building a team of people who understand that our success is meaningful only to the extent that it enables us to have greater impact. Maya gets that in the same way Selene gets it, in the same way. I hope all our future highs will get it. I have a question for you, I say. What do you think we should do if someone like Rory applies to work here again? Someone with talent but a history of behavior that conflicts with our values. She considers the question seriously. I think it depends on whether they've genuinely changed or whether they're just saying what they think we want to hear. And I think the only way to evaluate that is to look at what they've done recently, not just what they say about their past mistakes. It's a wise answer, and it crystallizes something I've been thinking about since the legal crisis ended. The question isn't whether people can change. Clearly they can, as Professor Granger's evolution has demonstrated. The question is how to distinguish between genuine growth and strategic performance. As I finally head home, walking through the Manhattan streets that have become familiar territory over the past decade, I think about the unexpected ways this year has unfolded. I started January focused on scaling our impact and growing our team. I never anticipated that I'd spend months fighting for the basic legitimacy of my work, or that the attack would ultimately strengthen, rather than weaken, what we've built. But maybe that's the nature of meaningful work. It generates both passionate support and intense opposition, because it threatens systems and assumptions that some people have invested in maintaining. The young woman who stood in front of Professor Granger's class 10 years ago wanted to prove that she belonged in business, that her ideas were valid, that people like her could build something significant. She succeeded at all of that. But she also learned that success brings new kinds of challenges and responsibilities. The question now isn't whether I've proven myself, it's what I do with the platform and resources that success has provided. How do I use this opportunity to create more opportunities for other people? How do I maintain the values that built Mentor while scaling to reach more people who need what we provide? How do I ensure that 10 years from now, when the next generation of idealistic students presents seemingly naive ideas about using business for social good, they get a different response than I did? Those are the questions that will guide the next phase of this journey. And for the first time since this whole adventure began, I'm more excited about the future than I'm about settling scores from the past. Tomorrow I'll call Professor Granger and accept his invitation to speak to his students. I'll tell them about the importance of intellectual courage, about the difference between skepticism and cynicism, about what's possible when you refuse to let other people's limitations become your own. But tonight, I'm just going to sit in my apartment, a beautiful space in a building I never could have afforded a decade ago, and appreciate how far we've all come. The leather journal from my coffee shop days is sitting on my desk, and I flip to a blank page to write the first entry I've made in months. Success isn't what I thought it would be when I was 22 and convinced that proving everyone wrong would solve all my problems. It's more complicated, more responsibility, and somehow more satisfying than simple vindication could ever be. The question isn't whether you can rise above the people who doubt you, it's whether you can build something so authentic and valuable that their doubt becomes irrelevant. I close the journal and look out at the city lights, thinking about all the young people who are probably sitting in their own small apartments right now, working on ideas that seem impossible, wondering if anyone will ever take them seriously. They will. Not everyone, and not immediately. but the people who matter will recognize authentic innovation when they see it. And if they're lucky, they'll find mentors who help them navigate the gap between vision and reality. If they're really lucky, they'll build something so meaningful that 10 years later, the people who laughed at them will be asking to be part of it, though. And if they're extraordinarily lucky, they'll be wise enough to say yes. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.